Welcome to Episode 4 of Christ Revealed, the history, the evidence, the inspiration. Well, here's Episode 4 of our 9-part docuseries. Momentum is building. You're going to get more and more information, more and more stimulation, more and more inspiration. Excited to bring this to you. Also remember, you can own Christ Revealed. There's multiple packages, and in those packages, there's varying bonuses that I think you'll be very interested in. So take a look at what's there, see what package is right for you. Own this, bring it home, something you can revisit over and over again. And I have to say that many people had suggested that Christ Revealed would make a phenomenal gift for someone else. I think you might have some people in mind. So take a look at what we have, see if it's right for you, and then go ahead and make the right choice and share this with the world. Episode 4 coming up right now, amazing information. It keeps building in momentum. Let's get this party started. Dr. Gary Habermas is considered one of the greatest Christian apologists alive. He's an incredible academic. He writes extensively on the resurrection of Christ. He enters debates, and if you are around this community at all or ever watched his debates, they're quite entertaining. Dr. Habermas is kind of an enigma because he's got this great, distinct scholarly aspect to him in the academic world, but he's also grew up on the streets of Detroit, so he's got that little bit of a street brawler aspect to him also. When you take these two things and put them together, you got one stimulating, exciting, and in times humorous experience. He's a wealth of knowledge. I have to tell you that he debunks a lot of the challenges to the concept of a resurrected Christ. This is one that you want to watch. You won't take your eyes off the screen the entire time. Turn off all distractions and tune in for my interview with Dr. Gary Habermas. So, Dr. Habermas, thanks so much for taking some time. And I have to tell you, I've been really looking forward to this interview because everybody else I talk to says, I got to talk to you.
Really?
Yeah,
you never know what those reasons are for.
Well, let me put it this way. They all said it with a twinkle in their eye, so I think we're about to find out.
All right.
Can you maybe just start with a brief bio sketch of your background?
Well, I'm from Detroit, although I've lived in Virginia now for over 30 years. I grew up in a German Baptist family and lived in the city, so kind of rough. Maybe apologetics and walking the streets and staying alive are similar species here. But I was raised in a Christian home, and when I was a teenager, I started having some doubts, and I started wondering, is there any basis for Christianity? How would I know? And of course, friends and nervous parents came alongside me, and I was visiting the Mormon temple in Utah, and I went to other religious kinds of churches and talked to people of other religious persuasions, and I wondered what else could be true and do we have any basis? And they would try to help me, and they'd say, well, hey, have you heard the latest discovery on the reliability of the New Testament? Or, hey, there's new archaeological discovery. What about the Dead Sea Scrolls? It's like, and they wanted creation. Well, you got some good scientific evidence for creation. And I studied these things enough to go, yeah, that's okay, but I wouldn't want creation to be true and Christianity not. So how do I know Christianity is true? And one day, it occurred to me while doing some reading, because I was getting a very bad habit in those days of not doing my schoolwork, staying up late at night, reading some pretty sophisticated stuff to answer my own questions, getting to bed late, and to this day I do the same thing. But one day I was reading, and this text said, if Jesus has been raised from the dead, you could pretty much hang the Christian hat on the truth of the resurrection, because it's the, as I like to say, yellow brick road. I mean, stay on that road and you end up at the Emerald City of Oz. So the gospel's the gospel for a reason. It's the center of Christianity. I thought, wow, I have no idea if the resurrection happened or not. But if it did, I could see the reasoning here, because why would God raise somebody who was a heretic? The resurrection is afterlife, so we are pointing to the Emerald City. I mean, we are talking about where do we go from here, and Wow, this is cool. So in my teen years, I started studying the resurrection. And when people will say to me in interviews, well, did you do this to help your students or to do this or to do that? And I'll say, no, I was really selfish. I did it for me because I had some really heavy questions. And I actually got to a place in my late teen years where I thought, I just have to give up. You can believe the resurrection by faith, but you can't say it's true. And I had an issue at that time that I couldn't get past, but it's because I only found out years later, it's because I was reading some really good books on the resurrection that were written around 1908, 1910, and science has changed since then. And when I couldn't get over this bump, now you can get over the bump pretty easily. But at the time, I just had to walk away from it and said, yeah, I better just get on with my life and don't know if it's true or not. I came back to it later, did my dissertation at Michigan State University on the resurrection. They let me do it.
So we'll talk about that. So when you propose, so this is your PhD resurrection.
Yep.
You're at Michigan State.
Yep.
So you proposed that you want to do this on the resurrection.
Yeah.
How did the faculty respond to
Well,
that?
one of the guys said to me, he says, we're kind of liberals here, but we'd like to think of ourselves as good liberals. What we mean by good liberals is we don't have to agree with you.
Right.
If you don't agree with the way we say it, that's fine. Just be able to say something with data. Have reasons for what you're saying. We don't care if it's the line or not, but be able to defend things. And then as I was leaving that meeting with the director of the program, because about half my committee probably believed in the resurrection and the other half did not.
Okay.
And so they were a nice balance. But he said something to me. He says, oh, by the way, don't tell us the resurrection happened because the Bible said it happened.
Wow.
And I was trying to act like, and I thought he was saying, as so many people think today, I thought he was saying, you can't use the Bible. That's not what he was saying. Bart Ehrman, who's the best known skeptic in North America, if you don't quote the New Testament, he will. Now, he's like the spider. I don't know if this is true or not, but when you hear the story that spiders know how to run across the web because they know which ones are sticky and which ones are not.
Right.
The critics will only quote verses that they know have good reasons behind them.
Right.
My professor didn't care one iota if I used the New Testament, expected me to use the New Testament. Liberals will use the New Testament. Just know which strands of the web you're walking on, know why you're doing it. So that got me into a lifelong study of thinking the way critics think. And if the critics are right about the Bible, the New Testament, if they're right, do we still have a resurrection?
Interesting.
And that was what my dissertation really came down to.
So, when you concluded it, how different was the final paper versus what you thought it was going to be when you started?
Actually, probably pretty close because by that time I had already studied the event for about 6 years, more than that. And I will always remember I was pastoring before I finished my PhD. And I sat in my living room one night because I still had doubts about my faith, even though I never let on with my people that I had. I mean, all doubts are questions, and we all have questions. Sure. And I sat there, and one of the alternative theories against the resurrection bothered me. And I looked the other day, I just pulled this out of my file about 3 days ago. But I took a sheet of paper, and here's what I wrote on it in my living room. What would have to be false in order for this theory to be true? How many refutations do we have? And my point was, I hadn't even started writing my dissertation, but my point was, how many things do I know to be true from the New Testament critically, any one of which will refute this theory?
Right.
And I got all the way down the first page with like 25 reasons, flipped the page over, and I got to about 30 things that would have to be different. I thought, and I made a mental note that evening, I thought, that's the kind of critique I want, something where I can handle, where I have so many comebacks against a critical theory that, as has happened in some debates, I'll start saying, well, yeah, but the problems with that theory, 1, 2, and I always tell my students, number them, because otherwise they'll think later, yeah, he gave me 3 or 4. He goes, excuse me, I gave you 9.
Right.
It was like, so I would count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and sometimes the critic goes, okay, I'm good. And so that's kind of the way I started thinking. How many refutations do I have of this? And can we handle anything from any angle that comes at the resurrection. And if it's solid, whenever the New Testament defines the gospel, it always includes the deity, death, resurrection of Jesus. As long as deity, death, resurrection are solid, I don't have to know if I'm a Calvinist or an Arminian. I don't have to know how old the earth is. I don't have to know, am I dispensationalist or covenantal? I don't have to answer those questions. If the center's true, as I teasingly tell my grad students, I'll say, I might take a course on creation with Moses, or I might take a course on the resurrection with Paul. I'll answer those questions later, but let me make sure there's a yellow brick road, and let me make sure there's an Emerald City of Oz, and we're good to go.
So yeah, this is the core of it all. And what have you found to be the toughest, critique or objection to the resurrection?
Someone's going to say I'm cocky, but I don't think there's any great comebacks. The one that probably caused me the most time, the response today goes something like this. According to my count, my head count, less than 25% of critics actually opt for naturalistic theories anymore. Naturalistic theory is, no, Jesus wasn't raised from the dead. What really happened was fill in the blank. And I don't care what you fill in the blank with. Okay, they're kind of gotten away from that in recent years. They go with what I call meta-critiques, big ones that question the whole thing. And the one that's caused the most thinking is, yeah, you got some good reasons here. This is thoughtful, and I understand you're using my Bible. You're using the critic's Bible, and I appreciate you thinking like I think. But here's your problem. You're telling me that I have to believe in a whole nother world, and I don't believe in a whole nother world. I don't know how you have evidence for anything outside of this workaday world, this cement and trees and driving my car and go to work and back. That's the only world I know. So when you tell me, oh yeah, now I want to talk to you about the world of angels and miracles and where a son of God came to earth, I'm going, you've got some good data here, but something else must be true because I never see a world like that. That kind of comeback. And so that's a second cognate area I've started moving into. A lot of my friends will get around the objection by saying, well, have you ever heard this argument for God's existence? Because if there's an argument for God and his world is the real world and this is a creation, well then if there's another world, I have to be able to respond at another level. Or the one that I've chosen to work with the most is near-death experiences and afterlife. Because if there's an afterlife, then you can't criticize my effort to talk about the afterlife in the form of Jesus' resurrection. Afterlife, unless you can refute this NDE stuff, which is highly evidential, then don't criticize me on resurrection because I've already shown you that the door is open.
Let's talk about NDE. So what have you been discovering relative to near-death experiences?
Well, I just getting ready to publish an article where I catalog 300 evidential NDE cases.
And by evidential, you mean that they're documented, corroborated?
They're documented, but the person who's having the NDE sees something outside the emergency room, outside the operation room. They're often drawn to where their family are. For some reason, they're drawn to the waiting room that's 2 floors away, and they see something really, really odd in the room. Like one account is a family member who was just plain nervous, who never smoked, and is known for telling their family, she's an older lady, a grandmother, and she said, I hate those cancer sticks. I'll never smoke. You'll never see one in my mouth. All they do is ruin lives. And when they looked in on the family, they said, oh, Grandma Jones, I heard her say, I'm going outside and smoking a cigarette. I go, of all the people in the world, that's strange. And later you say to her, did you say that? And she said, as a matter of fact, I did. Do you know about what time that would be? Well, yeah, because I just looked up at I was thinking about going outside, so I looked up at the watch, wondered how much longer the operation's going on, and it was 3:06. I'll never forget that time. And maybe there's some record in the emergency room where you were out and you coded between 3:05 and 3:14. When things like that happen, they do make you think twice, and we have a little bit of crossover between scientific measuring and something really strange like, my other grandmother smokes, I can understand that, but this grandmother, No, this will never happen in 100 years, but I caught it. I saw her do it.
Right.
And there's 300 cases like that. Some of the cases, the reports they have that are corroborated are unbelievable. And these days, when you have a cardiac arrest, you measurably lose heart activity.
Mm-hmm.
Well, your brain stops in just under an average of 15 seconds. So at the 2-minute mark, this person could be effectively, measurably now,
Right.
who knows what, machines can't measure,
Right.
but in 3 minutes, you would be effectively without a heart or a brain.
Right.
Now, if you don't have a heart or a brain because you're in the table because you just had we're trying to fix your heart, and right in the middle of it, you had a cardiac arrest.
Right.
What are you doing watching your grandmother who never smoked in the room? And you say, well, that's an odd lineup of things. Well, there are a fair number of odd lineups of things like that have been written up.
Yeah. And so you said you studied 300 of these cases.
There's over 300 that I know of, 300 evidential cases. The majority of those, some of them are in private literature where someone interviewed somebody, but the majority of them have been published.
Wow. And any other outstanding things that you saw in those cases that you think are enlightening, especially for a Christian?
Yeah, you mean like another evidential case? Or
Yeah,
just,
any kind of visions that people had that they reported when they came back?
there are cases where there's 5 people in a room and one of them flatlines or one of them has a problem, or we're all visiting you in the hospital and you're pretty close to death. In one case, there's this ball of light that seems to appear in the middle of the room, and we're looking around like nobody wants to talk, and they're going, and everyone's going like that. And the guy who was down on the ground, there's some facsimile of a spirit-looking thing, and the guy goes into the ball of light and goes off, and all 5 of us are left there going, what just happened? And they're watching the person. So there are well people who claim to have witnessed people who are really in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Or actually, in some cases, in 2 of the cases I know, the person who's in trouble, they both died.
Right.
But the other people were watching them go off into the wild blue yonder, so to speak, and there's 5 of them, Some of their near-death experiences, they meet somebody, a dad who died 18 years ago. And there's been a family mystery that they haven't been able to figure out where something is after dad dies. And when they come back, they say, Dad told me where this thing is, and you will never believe where it is. And he gets this information, and he goes and looks where he said his dad told him, and this thing is there, like a little money bag or a little bank certificates, and he put it up in the rafter behind something at a particular place in the attic. Or there are stories like that too, but the only problem is his dad's been dead for 18 years. So if he got that information indeed, now you're going, well, that goes a little too far. You're getting a little off the yellow brick road there. Mm-hmm. But still, how am I going to answer it? Right. And if his dad's been functioning somewhere for 18 years, that's more than just, because see, one of the comebacks is, well, yeah, that may be good for 2 minutes, but that's not exactly what we call afterlife. It is if your dad's been dead for 18 years.
Interesting.
So
yeah,
there's just about every kind of evidential case you can think of. And so I've actually been in debates where I'll be talking about resurrection. And one critic said, well, I don't want to talk about the resurrection. I want to talk about what kind of a world do you think this is that you can even talk resurrections? Mm-hmm. And I said, do you want to talk about near-death experiences? Well, he knew I did a lot of research. And if he goes, no, I don't want to talk about near-death experiences. So he was asking me about what kind of a world do we live in? But when I purported to give evidence, he didn't want to go any further.
Yeah, interesting, which is sort of this confirmation bias, right? It's not somebody wanting to come in and say, let's see if we can just, discover some or come to some understanding with an open mind. It's saying, I've got an agenda, and it's almost like you're saying which ones are sticky and which ones not sticky. That's basically saying, I want to confirm what I already think, not try to learn something new.
Yeah, it's just occurred to me lately how acidic the political situation is in our country. And when you're on the other side and you didn't expect to lose an election and you're just plain angry, sometimes you don't have data on your side. You certainly don't have votes on your side because you lost. So it's almost as if, this is just a guess, but it seems like the options are, I didn't beat you with in the empirical realm, votes, so I'll take it to the courts. Mm-hmm. And I think some of the critics are going there today. The evidence is so strong for religion in general, Christianity in particular, that this is a Narnia-type world. It is a world with yellow brick roads and emerald cities and a real Narnia, an Aslan somewhere.
Right.
The data are so good, as I tell my PhD students, we have a lot of arrows in our quiver today. We have a lot of different things. Well, what about this field? And you can change fields. I mean, you go intelligent design, fine-tuning, arguments for God's existence, the Shroud of Turin, afterlife. Critics now think that Jesus definitely was a miracle worker when he lived. It's a whole new field to open up. He didn't just rise from the dead. He predicted it ahead of time, which is a great arrow, because if the strangest event in history were predicted ahead of time, that would mean that I'm a player. That would mean that I have the worldview down because I knew it was going to happen. So I had, if you want to say it the way the New Testament says it, this I've received of my Father. The Lord has permission because he knows the one who created everything. It's like, wow, this is heavy. Where do you line this reliability of Scripture? We have so many arrows to draw from. I got a feeling that sometimes the other side, like in politics, is saying like, yeah, I don't think I want to debate this, but I will meet you in court because you're not being politically correct. You can no longer witness. You can no longer, and they're going to try to handle it in the courts because I think, this is my view, I think they're not doing so well on the data.
Well, this is very interesting because one thing that I've observed is it seems to me that there's a more burdensome standard for evidence for the resurrection than there is for other historical things. Do you find that to be true?
Sure.
Yeah.
Because they don't believe in Narnia. They don't believe in the Yellow Brick Road. I mean, if you don't think there's a Middle Earth or a Narnia or a Yellow Brick Road, it is kind of strange. No matter what the evidence is, you're going to say, well, yeah, well, hallucinations.
Right.
And you go, I'm sorry, we have really good early evidence for group appearances, which we do, and people don't see hallucinations in groups. Well, people don't see resurrected people either. So something's got to give here. Yeah, but you have a lousy theory. Yeah, well, you believe something crazy supernatural. So if you start asking questions about what world it is, you have to bring other data in here to show that there's an Aslan somewhere. And once you connect that, if there is a Narnia, and someday we're there for eternity, then there's a lot of stock in whether the resurrection happened or not.
Yeah.
And now you can't say, well, you want me to believe in a crazy world, so I'm going to think that it's something like hallucinations. I'm going to go there. Well, you don't have that option if I know that other world is there.
Right.
If that's my backup, just refute me on my data for the data's sake. And as a critic recently said, an agnostic scholar, he said, group appearances are really rough on hallucinations.
Yeah.
But you go, well, yeah, I don't believe in that world anyway. But now you do, unless you can refute this other data. Now, what do you do with hallucinations? And one of the leading scholars, skeptics, who used to take hallucinations, he just recently has come out and said, I'm not going to take theories anymore.
Wow.
I think he sees windows and doors closing on him.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I'm finding a lot of times as I've been looking at this and having these conversations that there's a lot of contradiction in the skeptics where they'll critique the evidence you present, as far as the history and the rules of evidence they'll apply to the history of Jesus and the details of what the accounts are, but then they accept it around other historical characters where there's they say, oh, this is a validated historical fact based on evidence, but when you present as compelling or as detailed evidence from the point of Christ.
Excellent.
So do you see that? So it's so
all the time. It's two standards.
Yeah, two standards.
Yeah, it's mine, and when we get too close to yours, that's
Right.
the two standards. This is an actual situation. I was debating a very well-known atheist, and he had just stood up and said, we got to the dialogue part, so we were talking to each other, and he just said, I'm sorry, the Gospels are not good sources. They're too long after the events. They happen too late. And I'm sitting there going, really? They're too long after the events? All right, Mark is plus 40, 40 years from the cross.
Right.
So Mark plus 40, this is the critics' dates now. I'll use the liberal dates,
Right.
quote unquote. Evangelicals back these up, well, at least for Matthew and Luke. They back them up about 20 years. But this is the worst it gets. Mark is about plus 40. Matthew's about plus 50, Luke's about plus 55, and John's about plus 65. Everybody puts John at about 95 or subtract 30 from the cross, plus 65. Well, years ago, I heard about a man who was writing his memoirs of World War II. That was in about 1990. So the closest he could have been to the last events of the World War II would have been 1945. He's writing his memoirs at plus 45, which is about exactly where Mark is. And nobody's going to say to him, I'm sorry, General, you're a stinking liar. You don't know what you're talking about. No, because people can remember things at 45. So now when I'm giving lectures, I'll say, how many of you here remember things from 45 years ago? And of course, there's hands all over. 50 all over. 60. And a bunch of hands go up. And they'll say, how many of you are so sure of events that some things that happened, maybe like a marriage, your first child, 60 years ago, and you're sure you could pass a test that says this is as clear as my mind as yesterday? Hands are going up. So that's not impossible, is it? No. Why is it impossible for the gospel guys? Well, because you need it. No, they don't. They don't say that. But
Right.
I mean, So I asked the guy. I said, "Well, let me ask you a question. You're so sure the Gospels are lousy?" Yes. Do we know a lot about Alexander the Great? I actually said this in the dialogue, and he said, "Yes, we know a lot about Alexander the Great." His father's Philip of Macedon. It's probably the most unique link in history of the most brilliant military mind with Aristotle, who was his personal tutor. He conquers the whole world before he's hardly, he's still a young man. And these incredible stories about Alexander. When is the earliest, I don't mean an inscription in a rock, Alexander was here. I mean, what's the earliest extended treatment of Alexander? The guy goes, I don't know. So, well, you should. When you're going to throw criticisms around like this, you should. The earliest biography, there were a lot earlier ones, but we don't have them. The earliest one we have is plus 280.
Wow.
280 years. But Alexander's good for you, right? Yeah, Alexander's good to go. But Mark's lousy at plus 40, right? And John, who's the worst, is horrible at plus 65, but Alexander's biographer's good at 280? Well, that's because the New Testament believes in propaganda. It's a world of demons and miracles and resurrections. Oh, really? Well, it's a good thing these Alexander books are good history books, because Plutarch, who may have the best-known life of Alexander, the book starts like this. It's commonly believed that Alexander's mother was a virgin and his father was one of the gods. So it's a good thing these ancient historians didn't bring any religion into their writing. And of course, by now the audience is laughing and they're going, I said, look, I'm not trying to embarrass you. I said to the guy, I actually got to be friends with him that weekend. And I said, I'm not trying to embarrass you. I'm just saying you're playing with two decks, and one of them, or two sets of dice, and one of them's loaded. I mean, you're not giving Christians a fair shot, and you're coming back with, well, they believed in the supernatural. Well, so did Alexander and everybody at that time. In fact, there's almost no Greco-Roman historians who don't incorporate the supernatural into their histories. Almost none. So play the game by the rules. And if I have good data, deal with my data, but don't sneer and tell me you hate them. You may hate what I stand for. You may hate my political party. You may hate my religion, my ethnic background, whatever. But treat me fairly and deal with my data. That's all I ask.
It's a matter of being intellectually honest, right?
It is.
And I'm wondering how much is self-deception on their part, where they're even deceiving themselves sometimes. But when you look at the other characters from history, even at a similar time to Jesus, and what is generally accepted as evidence to validate that this history is accurate, you can't say that's better evidence than what the Bible presents, or what evidence exists for Jesus inside and outside the Bible.
And again, they'll go, well, that's because your books are propaganda. My books are history. And I'll say, okay, well, I'll tell you what. You read Suetonius, 12 Caesars. He wrote he's writing about 120 AD. So he's writing less than 100 years after Jesus. And it's called the 12 Caesars, and in the table of contents, for several of the better-known ones, Julius Caesar, Caesar Augustus, it says, Julius Caesar, later deified. Alexander, later deified, because they were emperor worshippers.
Right.
So don't tell me you can wade in there and do you might be a secularist. You might be a secularist Roman who doesn't believe in the gods. But just look at what Suetonius wrote, and Jews were exempted because people knew they were weird and they'll rebel and let them believe in their God. But most other people around the empire had to worship. In fact, one writer, Pliny, one early writer, writing about the same time as Suetonius, he would try to make Christians recant by denying their belief in the deity of Christ and worshiping a representation or avowing their faith in a Roman emperor. It was you can't say Christians are religious and nobody else is.
Right.
It's just keep your hate speech to yourself if you want to say it in politically correct terms, but answer my data. And
Right.
if you can get them to say, well, I just don't like where you're going, I think you're prejudiced, that's fine. Tell me my views are right, and you're just not going to be as prejudiced as I am. You could, I'm sure, do better than I can on some certain things, but we're not talking about me and how prejudiced I am. We're talking about whether my data are right or wrong. Refute it or do something, but don't tell me you walk away from it because you hate it, because now it's your emotions that's guiding your history.
And this is what's interesting because, our characterization for Christ revealed is those three pieces. We say it's the history, which is basically it's just the factual history of what occurred, the evidence, what evidence exists to support it, and then there's the inspiration. So now based on this, it emerges this inspiration for, all these people worldwide all these years later. So what happens is, I think, and tell me if I'm reading this right, you've really painstakingly said, all right, here's the history and the evidence. Now, you can decide if you want to have the inspiration that goes with it or not, but it's really hard to invalidate the history and the evidence.
Yeah, and theoretically, you could step in there and you could say, yeah, you're really off on this and that, and the Roman emperors didn't really do this, and this is really what happened at the history of that time. And I'm not going to follow you in your politics, or I'm not going to follow you in your faith stuff. But if they want to do data, that's, of course I will take it in bits and pieces. If you're going to respond to my data first, and you say, but I'm not going to believe the fundamentalist stuff that Jesus was the Son of God. Or hey, just answer my data.
Right.
And if he can't get around it, because I'm saying right now I got a lot of arrows and I've got some things I want him to check out.
Right.
I'll say later, now just tell me something. How do you get out of the Jesus was really the Son of God thing? Well, I don't believe in those things happen. I understand you don't. But how do you refute this? Let me line up some more data for you. So I introduce more data. And they'd probably resent the getting closer and closer and you knowing this field maybe a little better than they do, and sometimes they just walk away.
Yeah.
I've had guys, I had one guy stop a dialogue and say, I'm not talking anymore. People get worked up. Just look at the political debates today. People get angry. They walk off stage. They call people names.
Right.
They have to bleep it out when they, because you're dealing with my life. You're telling me what my kids and I have to do. You're trying to prescribe for me what's good ethics and what's bad ethics and how I should vote on this amendment. Yeah, if it's relevant to some facts we've solved, I'd like you to tell me how else you can get out of this. And piece by piece, you start building a worldview. But what you said earlier, they're speaking through their prejudices. Really, we all are in a way. I tell my grad students, we all wear glasses. We talk about people who wear rose-colored glasses and people who wear depressed glasses and always down glasses and always up glasses. And our glasses are not the world. In fact, they're not even really us.
Right.
They're the way we view the world. But we have to be ever so careful that we don't let our glasses prescribe the kind of universe that's there. I mean, maybe for you, if you wear rose-colored glasses, the yellow brick road might be the rose brick road.
Right.
I mean, we do really color the world we live in.
Yep. Well, so here's the thing that I find really uncanny is that from, let's call it the general societal context outside of Christianity, most people would say you have to ignore facts in order to adopt Christian views. And you're and you're coming here saying we're relying on the facts to adopt the views.
Yeah.
How do you solve that problem? Because you're out there doing the debates. You've done, I think you said 650 interviews. So this is your life's work. You're writing, you're public speaking, you're debating, etc. But even after all this, there's such a mischaracterization. How do you think that is overcome?
I think you have to, I would say, you keep giving them the data, keep asking them for a viable explanation, not any old explanation, a viable explanation that can account for the data as well as yours. And sometimes, even if they're your best friends, I have a lot of skeptic, agnostic, even guys who are skeptical or agnostic New Testament profs who I've become friends with over the years through dialoguing huge names. And they might get upset with me. They might, but I think there's a lot on the line here. Let's put it this way. Real mundane example. There's a lake out here behind my house. A few years ago, I had a friend of the boat with me, and I caught a large bass out in the lake. I pulled it in, and I looked around the little lake, and nobody was out in their yard. But darn it, if I'm going to catch a bass like that, I held it up and I went, "Whoa!" Nobody heard me except the guy in the boat with me. If I'm going to tell you about the bass I caught, my first child being born, now we're getting a little higher,
Right.
the new job I just got, how I got a publication, and you're one of my best friends, so I'm going to say, hey, what about those Packers winning the Super Bowl last? We talk about those things.
Right.
All right, now if it's about your faith, or if I can help you because you're going through an issue with the high school child, and I was already been there and done that because my child's a little older than yours, we share those things.
Right.
If it's as mundane as a bass, as important as, let me just give you a point or two that I found out about my son. I'm going to tell you because we're friends and I care about you. I'm not trying to be cocky, but if I have good arguments for what I believe, and you're not doing a very good job refuting them, to be frank. If I talk about the bass, should I tell you about reality? If I tell you about my first child being born, should I tell you some new evidence I found out for Jesus? If we're good friends and we're fishing, I don't play golf, but I mean, if you're doing that kind of stuff, and it's just any old thing, why wouldn't I throw out there, I care about you, so I'm thinking this is something about, we've talked about religion before. I just discovered something you might want to hear. Did you hear that story in the radio? Did you hear they just discovered XYZ? That's normal conversation. If I'm in the driver's seat and I have the data, I feel pretty comfortable. And if you're the guy getting beat on because you're not read up on it, yeah, it's not comfortable. But if I know you care about me and our families are close and the child, the bass, that's life, I'll let you go a lot further. I trust you enough to know that you're not trying to dog me. And so I think a lot of this, two things go together: good data and friendship. Good data and caring about the person. I'm not trying to take your scalp in a quick lunch and then go, hey, nice meeting you. We'll probably never see each other again. And I can go one more as I walk away. No, but if we're fishing buddies, we're golf buddies, I think friends can push and tease and
Or even collegial discussions, with other people who are,
Unbelievers.
leading an intellectual life in whatever realm they're doing it, and have a collegial conversation. It should be stimulating.
But you have to be fair, too, and Christians can be as unfair as anybody else. But I think about Richard Dawkins today, who says, now, what would you rather have? Do you want the sciences, or do you want it all on faith? All on faith. That's what the Christians say. Either he's really silly and hasn't studied it, or he wants a bad caricature. And then he starts this thing about where he calls atheists the brights. Brights in society. They're the bright lights. And religion is, horrible and leads us to war and everything else. Just deal
On
with the
that,
data.
this is the question that I had, is that I'm wondering if a part of the challenge or the problem is that, because listening to your approach on all this, it seems faith is a mischaracterization of what you're bringing to the table.
Yeah.
Right. So, and that in and of itself, I think starts to, misbrand Christianity.
It does.
And so because the words are important, because basically say, okay, this is my faith, but Yes, I understand, but there's a maybe a generic definition of faith, and maybe
That's good. That's good.
what you mean. So because
I mean belief system.
yes,
And to me, that means
that's
facts. And you
yes.
think I'm saying I take it a faith. An illustration I often use is coming to Christ has a lot similar to marriage. You might date somebody for years. You might know somebody better than anybody else in the universe, even their parents. You don't say I do, you're not married. I'm sorry. I mean, it's just the way the rules are. You don't say I do, you're not married. You can be best friends.
Right.
You could know them better than anybody in the universe. You want to spend more time with them than anybody else. You don't say I do, you're not married. Faith plays a role, but in marriage, you spend a lot. It's a silly person who wakes up in the morning and somebody's in bed with them. They have no idea who this person is. And they look down and there's a ring on their hand and they go, what was I drinking last night? That kind of stuff makes movies, but it's kind of silly. We get to know somebody and we say, I don't think I can live without this person. Right. So then we say, I do. The faith commitment, and that's what it is, for better or worse, rich or poor, till death do we part. That's the icing on we've been hanging around for 2 years and I love you with all my heart and I want to be with you. So I'm going to make a commitment to you. There's a difference between a groundless commitment and a grounded commitment. It's not the person whose ring is this that I find the next morning, oh no, I'm tied down. That's not Christian faith.
But the skeptics are using the term faith in an abusive manner.
Good point.
And I think that's interesting because, I would listen to what you say, other apologists that, I've been having these conversations with, and the construct of faith is, I think, incompatible with how they're approaching their faith in Christianity. And so
even the average Christian,
even the average Christian. So it's been very interesting because there's zero doubt in my mind at this point, and we're heading to Israel pretty soon to go even deeper. But there's very little doubt in my mind that the for lack of a better term brand known as Christianity is completely misunderstood from the outside world. And I think it's and some things are coming clear to me as I'm hearing the types of evidence that you're presenting and what your experiences are interacting with these people. If you were to now look at the resurrection, and if you were to say kind of as a highlighted summary, here's the pieces of evidence that have lined up, and maybe even in more modern times have lined up because of some of the archaeological evidence that's come, other things that have come along, to really say that the evidence is just these are the highlights of the evidence that's very compelling about the validity of the resurrection.
I'll tell you what. Let me do it in terms of making a quick comment about a methodology I use, how I marshal these things, and what I use. When I did my dissertation, back to my lead professor, who made the comment, "We're not saying you can't use the New Testament. Just don't say it's true because the New Testament is true. But build a case by using accredited passages from any material. Use accredited passages." Okay, so what I did was, in that dissertation, I went back and I said, there's a certain number of facts, and I think I started with about a dozen of them. There's facts that virtually every person who is... Now, you got to be a specialist. You can't be somebody who says, well, yeah, I'm interested in religion. I blog... once a month for my friends, and I have a PhD. What's your PhD in? It's in electrical engineering. Well, I mean, that's fine, but I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal with you. I won't talk about electrical engineering if you don't try to tell me what the New Testament means, because you have to work in our own fields. And so I would say, let's just use the specialists. I don't care what you believe. I don't care if you're an atheist New Testament professor. Don't care if you're an agnostic classical you study Greco-Roman civilization. I don't care. Just know the data, and I'm going to use a list of facts. So I started with a dozen, then I cut them down to a half dozen, and I kept asking, how low can you go? How much data do we have for this or that? And I came up with this argument that I call the minimal facts, or sometimes I call it the lowest common denominator argument. And I'll say, if I had 100 facts in the New Testament, I get the resurrection easily if you'll give me those 100 facts. If you give me a semi-skeptical New Testament, it's a decent source, but it's not inspired. Don't talk supernatural with me. What's the chances of getting to the resurrection? with 50 facts instead of 100, you might be able to get around it. But what if I start with a list of a dozen? And you go, oh, no, I'll give you more than that. No, that's okay. I only, you have, and you tell your skeptical friend, you have way too much faith. I only need a dozen. And then I'll say, hey, I don't need a dozen. I'll use a half dozen. And I'll say, what do you think about these? And you go, I'll give you all half dozen, because I only pick the ones that are best accredited. And the minimal facts argument says if I only use the data which are allowed by the vast majority of critical scholars, and they're allowed because each one you pull out, the facts come in like this, so I could get 10 different perspectives, 5 different perspectives, whatever, on why that fact is true. Now, you allow it, right? Why do you allow it? Well, I don't know. I've looked it over, and the data look pretty good for this. Okay. Now, if I assemble 6 of those, what if the resurrection looks like the best option using your Bible? So you go, oh, you mean like Jefferson's famous scissors and paste Bible, you know, that famous picture of the Bible where the acid was poured on it. There's a lot of holes, and when you open it up, not every verse is there. Yeah, that Bible. You're going to give me how many facts again? I'll give you a dozen. Yeah, well, I just need a half dozen of them. And I like to play this how low can you go thing.
Right.
And Mike Lacona and guys and I who do this, we'll get down to 3 or 4. And I'll say, I'll use your data. And using only your data, because they're so well attested, you know, you're an agnostic, so there's got to be a reason you allow these facts. I can still show that the resurrection of Jesus is the best explanation for the data we have. Now, if your comeback is, which is common today, if your comeback is, yeah, but I don't know that world in which the resurrection occurs, then I might have to go, time out. Let's talk about a potential God, or let's talk about near-death experiences and afterlife, and then reopen the discussion and say if we do know something about a Narnia or a Yellow Brick Road or a Middle Earth, if there really is a reality there, there's somebody out there who created me and has a plan for my life. I mean, if there's something like this, now I've sufficiently closed off a couple of your big loopholes, and you have to handle that data face on. So you go, I don't know, hallucination. Well, now I've got you where I want you because you haven't thought about this. And so that's kind of the way I close it down. I will use the critic's Bible, and I use any number of big-name guys, because the way to argue today is to say, we can't trust the whole New Testament, the critic's view.
Right.
We can't trust the whole New Testament, but I can trust these pieces of data. And then I'll step in and say, what can we do with those pieces of data? And I'll weave a case and I'll say, bingo, we got resurrection.
Yep. So, and basically, as you're saying, what's based on these facts that are the ones that you're willing to accept, you choose the the areas that you want to accept, and basically the idea is, what's the most plausible explanation
Of just these.
Of just these.
Right. Now, the critic often comes back to me, and if you go down through history, if you go back 200 or 300 years when higher criticism starts, the one single objection that I've been able to find down through history goes like this, and it's very, very common. But the gospel accounts, especially those surrounding the crucifixion, burial, and resurrection, have so many discrepancies in them. Discrepancies like what? Well, how many women went to the tomb? How many angels were at the tomb? Well, Matthew mentions 1, Mark mentions 1, Luke 2, John 2. See, we're not too far off. 1 or 2 are, it's not bad. But you can say, well, who are the women? Matthew has 2 women. Mark has 3. Luke has 3, but one of them is different from Mark's third one. And John only has Mary Magdalene, but when she walks away to tell the disciples that the tomb's empty, she says, they've taken the Lord and we don't know where they've laid him. So there's more than one. John's just telling you, I don't care to give you a list of their names. So they'll say, well, what do you do with discrepancies? I like to play this little game with them where they'll say, I think there's discrepancies in the gospel accounts. And I'll go, and? Well, doesn't that bother you? And I'll go, and? Well, that means the text is not true, does it? Does it? If you rate a Greco-Roman historian, there's 2 things that don't work out. Does that mean that emperor was never in control? No. What if you listen to the 2 coaches after yesterday's big football game? One of them says, that guy's foot was out of bounds. I was standing right there, but the replay shows his foot was in bounds. You go, and? What are you saying? I'm saying that play with his foot did not change the game because that won by 2 touchdowns. I don't care what happened to the guy's foot. So we make allowances, and that's the way we normally argue. The point I'm trying to get across when I go and is I'm not arguing on the 100% we don't agree on. I'm arguing on the things that you think are impregnable. I'm using your facts, and I don't care how many women went to the tomb. We can talk about it later. I don't care about the angels. I want to know what you do with these 6 facts.
Right.
And if I can get a resurrection from these 6 facts, as Paul Meyer, retired professor of ancient history, Western Michigan University, he says there was a great fire in Rome. The sources are very divergent on whether Nero caused it or someone else did, how many sectors of the city were burned, exactly what happened. We can't put it together, but we know there was a great fire in Rome.
Right.
So if you and I can't agree on every last detail, you give me the 6 that you trust. Well, I'm thinking about recalling one of those. Well, I can see the fire's getting a little too hot. Right? So I'm using your data. Don't say, but I don't know about the women and the angels. We never once brought up the women and the angels, so don't bring them up now.
Right.
So I'm only building on the positive facts we both agree on. So it cuts down a lot of the garbage in conversation. Then somebody inevitably goes, well, forgive me, I'm just curious. Are you Calvinist or are you Arminian? Listen, let's do that over lunch tomorrow. But will you answer my question about these 6 facts? You have to stay on task.
Now you've got my appetite whetted. What are the 6 facts?
What are the 6 facts? Well, to show you how versatile this group is, we change them. You go, why do you change them? Because nobody only gives us 6 facts.
Right.
The skeptics will say, I'll give you 20. I'll go, I don't need a 20. In my dissertation, I did a dozen. All right, well, I'll give you those dozen. I don't need a dozen. I only need a half dozen. So it's intriguing that I can get down to a real small number because, of course, the smaller number I get, the more scholars I'll get on board.
Right.
In this book right here, The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus, Mike Lacona and I, we have a chapter 4 called A Quintet of Facts, 4 plus 1. So we're doing 5 in this one. I've been doing 6 lately. But on that kind of a model, and I'll explain the plus 1, I would take Jesus died by virtue of crucifixion, and somebody says, what's that got to do with the resurrection? Well, not much, but you need a dead guy before you can talk about resurrection.
Okay.
So, secondly, and I'm wording this very carefully after years of reading the skeptics. I read the skeptics more than I read, believers. Jesus' disciples had real experiences that they believed were appearances of the risen Jesus. In other words, it's a simple way to say they really believe they saw Jesus alive after he was put in a tomb.
Okay.
That's 2. 3, their lives were transformed to the extent that they were willing to die for a lie. Now, sometimes critics are they're waiting for you to say this, and they go, prove they all died. Nope, I'm not going to play that game. I didn't say I could prove they all died. Although, by the way, the 4 most influential early Christians, James, the brother of Jesus, Paul, John, and Peter, we have first-century sources for the martyrdom of 3 of them. So the more important they get, the better our evidence is. That's interesting. But you can't prove the rest. You're going to have to go to 3rd and 4th and 5th century sources for rumors about martyrdoms. I can't prove that. But I can show that they were so transformed that they put themselves in position where they were willing to die. You go, how do you know? Because they went to towns, they were told to leave, and they didn't, and they kept preaching, and they were stoned. Things happened to people. James, the son of Zebedee now, he's killed. Herod kills him. Stephen is stoned. Now, he's not an apostle, but Stephen was stoned. So they were willing to die. Fourthly, this fact of the resurrection was taught very, very early. Critics think we can get all the way back. Critical scholars, agnostics, unbelieving scholars, atheists like Michael Goulder passed away, I think, not terribly long ago, but Michael Goulder, an atheist New Testament scholar, says the report of the resurrection can be traced back to no more than about 2 years after the cross. You go, well, 2 years when our earliest source gospel is Mark at plus 40? How do we get plus 2? Well, it takes some arguments. It takes a way to get the path back there. But we're doing the Yellow Brick Road in reverse now. We're going back to the cross. But if an atheist New Testament scholar says it's 2 years, you better believe he thinks he has some reasons because he doesn't believe that Christianity is literally true. So it was proclaimed very early. and then two skeptics. I think they're singular enough that I would separate them. Paul, the persecutor, and James, the brother of Jesus, who the Gospels tell us was an unbeliever when Jesus came to town, there in Mark chapter 3, and then again in John 7. They were unbelievers. I'd use those 6. Now, we use 5 here, and we say quintet. We say 4 plus 1. What's the plus 1? Well, there's more evidences for the empty tomb than any other fact. But the definition of our minimal fact is we will use no facts where the evidence don't just pile in. And secondly, as a result, the vast majority of scholars concede that fact. You go, what's vast majority to you? Well, I'm the guy that did the head count. When people say, how do you know the vast majority? I'll say, I counted. Did you? Because I went back and went from my dissertation to present, and I've got 1,200 pages of sources on where scholars are today, and it's at about the 90-something percentile on these 4.
Okay.
Empty tomb, when I was in grad school in the 70s, I'm just guessing, scholarship might have been at plus 20%. The empty tomb was not popular. Today, it's about 75%. So it's come a long way, but it's not up in the 90-something realm. So we call the plus 1 is the more important thing. The evidence for the empty tomb is so good, but all scholars haven't conceded it yet, but we're getting the number. The number's going up. All right, how many evidences for the empty tomb? I said, I won't use any fact that doesn't have all these facts coming in on it. I gave a paper a few years ago at a scholarly conference that included 21 separate arguments for the empty tomb, and now I'm ready to add another one, 22. 22 arguments for the empty tomb. And here's what's incredible. It's not true because I pick up my Bible and I say, oh yeah, here's a verse. No, I can't get away with that. With these guys, I can only use it if those are critically given. All 22 are critically ascertained. If I have 22 evidences for something, that's way better than almost anything in the ancient world. So we stick it on there as a 4 plus 1. It deserves to be in the list by the evidence, which is by far the most important. There's a little lag time on how many people believe in it. So those are the ones I would use. I would say those 6, I would say 6 plus 1. The crucifixion. They had experiences they thought were the risen Jesus. Their lives were transformed to the point that they were willing to die. It was proclaimed very early, 1 to 2 years later. James and Paul, 2 skeptics, and the plus 1 is the empty tomb.
So when you put those together, the conclusion is, what's more plausible than Jesus was resurrected?
And they're going to probably come back and say, what's more plausible, planet Earth or Narnia? And I'd say, I'm glad you said that. Let's talk about Narnia. Let's talk about near-death. A new book just came out on near-death experiences, very scholar. It's written by the medical community. And the book starts out like this. I don't know if it's an advertisement or what, but this opening of the book is this. According to recent polls, 10 million Americans claim to have had near-death experiences. Now, those definitely aren't evidenced. Some of them could be lying. Some of them could have dreamt. Some of them could have been on drugs. Okay. But 10 million are a lot of experiences. And if you said to me, okay, funny man, how do you know there's a Narnia? How do you know there's a Middle Earth? How do we know there's a yellow brick road and an Emerald City? I'll say, you know what? If 10 million Americans alone claim to have been in this other world, you can't just blow it off and say you're all crazy. I'm saying, why don't you believe there's another world? Because I've never seen it. Okay, what else? None of my friends have ever seen it. Okay, that's good. But maybe you don't know any of these 10 million people. What if one of your friends had an NDE? It's not that uncommon. There's a lady in my church who had a near-death experience while she was delivering one of her children. And she didn't go to another world. She didn't meet Aslan. She stayed up by the ceiling. No evidence. She just said, I watched them working on me. And yeah, I saw a couple things in the room, and I mean, maybe something funny. I'm just making this up, but maybe one of the nurses who came in had a blue nurse's uniform on, everybody else had a white one. Just something a little bit odd. But she said, I was up by the ceiling, and I said, did it make an impression on you? And she said, it made a huge impression on me. And I said, why? And she said, because I know when something happens for me for real and I die,
there you go.
I'm not afraid. You're not afraid to die? Not at all. Why not? Been there. Been where? Now, I know I'm being silly when I say she's been to Narnia, but the point is she's been in this world that you don't have any friends that have been there, but if 10 million Americans have been there, this has had a profound effect on her life. She doesn't care that there's no evidence or that you don't believe her. And if I said to her, because I've interviewed a lot of these people, what are you more sure of? That you were up by the ceiling while your child was being born, or that you went to the supermarket last night and bought a loaf of bread? They'll usually say that I was up there. It's the most real thing that ever happened to me. And so I'll say to my friend, that one I would tell about my bass or my hole-in-one or my first child or my getting my doctor's degree, or I would say, you know, you don't have to believe these people, but you may be passing up on the most important fact you'll ever learn about the universe, that there is an Arya. And if there is, and the more I'm friends with them, the more I'll tease them. I'll say, you know, it's not safe for you to go home tonight. You might get hit by a car. You really need to be thinking about what I'm talking about. And I would say that I would kind of nag them, push them the way I would push any friend.
Right.
Like, you know, if you were a good fisherman, you'd catch a bass just like mine. You know, or you get a PhD, just like, you know, we do that with our friends. Friends don't let friends drive drunk, right? And friends don't let friends not know about a reality that you found something else about. These are the things in life we pass on normally.
You've written a lot of books. Some of them, or maybe many of them, are directed toward doubt. When people, you know, why they have doubt, the problem of evil, etc. What are your views on all that?
Well, I start with the very. Remember, I've mentioned I didn't get into the resurrection to be a good guy or to help people. I got into the resurrection because I was having issues.
Right.
I came to this whole topic from doubt. I've done 3 books on doubt, dealing with doubt, the Thomas Factor, using your doubts to grow closer to God, and Why Is God Ignoring Me? Interestingly enough, the cover on the book, Why Is God Ignoring Me, is a guy who's walking down the middle of a highway with an empty gas can. And it's so expressive, you know, because we do feel like we're on empty sometimes, and we've done everything. And how come he answered my friend's prayer? How come she got the near-death experience while she's having a child, and I got a child who's got issues, you know? It's a bigger part of the problem of evil. And philosophers like to say evil has some really objective components to it. You know, bad things happen to good people. But for the most part, evil has a lot to do with what color our glasses are. A lot to do. A lot to do. Contemporary psychology, which I'm no psychologist, but I've taught a little in this area, and contemporary psychology, probably the most common rubric for handling psychological problems, is a method that says the worst things that happen to you, there are exceptions, but for most of us, the worst things that happen to us, by worst I mean what causes most of your pain, is not what happens to you. It's not your car accident last week. It's not when you flunked out of a class at age 17 and always thought you were dumb ever since. You know, it's not what happens to you. It's how you download what happens to you. And we all know stories. Anyone who's been near sports or academia, we know the guy who everybody says you're a loser, you can't think, you're stupid, and the guy could have a really high IQ. But the problem is not when you call me names because I'm stupid. It's when I internalize it and say I must be stupid and don't do my homework and don't care because everybody knows I'm stupid. So it's not what happens to me, it's how I download it. And I deal with people who doubt all the time. They write to me like crazy. Got an email today from a lady. And they'll say, what do I do with these things? And I'll say, look, there's different kinds of doubt. But the most common kind of doubt is not factual doubt. People think it is, especially men, think it's, give me 22 evidences for the resurrection, I'll believe. If you're not inclined to believe, if you don't want to, you won't. What you're asking me is, can you what if it? And if you can what if it, which you can what if anything, I could give you 22 evidences and you could say, what if there's no God? What if we got this wrong and there's something that fell between the cracks and we're just not smart enough to know what it is? And then I'll say, well, let me ask you a question. Do you what if a lot? I would what if almost everything. Okay, second question. Does your doubt hurt? So my doubt's very painful. Why? Well, because, and here's the answer I get a lot. Because it's very personal. If there's a yellow brick road, you use your language. And if there's a Narnia, I want to be there. I want to be on the bus. I want to get there. But what if there isn't? What if I can't be sure? Or what if I think, what if my family goes there, but I'm missing the bus? These are painful thoughts. Okay, it's painful. Then your doubt, almost for sure, is emotional. No, I'm asking, how do I know the resurrection is true? That's right. You're asking the same questions the factual doubter is asking, how do I know the resurrection is, but you're trumping it when you're done with a little what if icing on your cake. You're getting the cake, and then you're slapping some icing on that nullifies the whole cake. And when you tell me it hurts, that's because this is the most valuable thing to you in the world, or close to it. And someone's told you you'll never have it. Or you might wonder, what if I never have it? And that hurts.
So what if I'm the guy with the gas can in the middle of the road, with the feeling is, why is God ignoring me? What's the alternative view for that person?
Well, let me. If you went to a counselor and you wanted to pay $100, $150 an hour, I don't know how much they charge. But here's an issue. What if your gas can is not totally empty? What if it's half full? And what if in the last month, if you would take the time to take a 3x5 card and jot down some things where God's answered your prayer, just happened to me the other day, jot down a few things that you asked for, and especially if it's a real special kind of prayer request that would be really cool for you, but it's not likely that this happened by accident. And you just jotted it down. Because like children, we are prone, if I ask God 10 things and 9 of them take place over 6 months, why do we forget the 9 he did and ask him why he never answered that one prayer for us? We do that all the time. Kids do it all the time. When we say, oh, kids are so ungrateful. Adults are ungrateful. And what if you think your gas can is empty, but it's not? Now, what I mean by that is this. We all have glasses. If my glasses are called cynicism, and I always look at God askance because when I was little, I went through a really, really scary situation, and I've always held it against God that he didn't pull me out of it and put me up on a rock like the psalmist says. That didn't happen to me. Well, someone could point out to you, there's some other guys who were in that situation. They got hurt a lot worse than you. Something was answered on your part. See, you'd forget all that. You say, I just know God didn't pull me out of it. And you walk around with this pain all your life. And you say, God let you down. Now, here's where it really hurts. My glasses are called cynicism. I look at the world with cynical glasses. Let's say God didn't let me down. I tell myself God lets me down. Here's the key. For me, God let me down. But God didn't. For me, God let me down. Because I see everything through these glasses. I can't see anything without looking through cynicism. So if I say, you let my dad die when my youngest was 9 years old when my wife died of stomach cancer. How come I didn't grow up with a mom? How come, why did God let that happen to me? Well, I don't know. When you get to heaven, God might need a whole sentence to answer that question for you. But there is an answer. Don't think that you're going to trump God with your knowledge all of a sudden. But if you say to you, God let me down, God let me down, God let me down, today you will believe God's untrustworthy, doesn't answer my prayers. But it's not the empty gas can. It's the cynicism from which you view the whole world. And everybody who knows you says, you've always had an axe to grind with God ever since your mom died. Well, wouldn't you be like that see, you just proved my point. In your mind, God's guilty. But what if God's not guilty? Now, by that I mean, God's the only person in the universe who can't go against his own attributes. I can lie. God can't lie. I can die. God can't die. God can't be other than God. God can't decide to trick you today in some kind of nasty or unethical way. God can't do that. So I'd say most of the time, the way we characterize our issues are the way we characterize the issues. It's what we make of it. No, you're wrong. My mom really died. She did, but that doesn't mean you know the reason or don't know the reason. I tell people, to me, the theme of the book of Job is Job realized by the end of the book that he knew enough about God to trust him in those things he didn't know. When I was growing up, my mother used to have this funny little way. My dad was very strict. went in special forces, fought in Germany, quit high school when he was 17 years old. Tough guy. He's dying of cancer now. Real tough guy. And my dad would be kind of hard on us sometimes. And he'd even say, boys, I've been hard on you, but for a reason. They got, we go to my mom and we go, Mom, he wants us to wash the cars on Friday night, and I already had plans with my friends. Can you please talk to Dad? Well, she didn't very often, but my mom had this way of going, it's going to be okay. Well, Mom, will you do it? It's going to be okay. Mom, will you talk to it? Have you ever trusted Mom and I didn't come through? All right, Mom, I'll give you another chance. And Friday night comes and I get to go out with my friends. So after a while, we got to trust my mom that she could pull this off. After a while, I start trusting Mom. Why can't God be like that? I think the answer that Job got, Job realized that he knew enough about God to trust some of those things he didn't know. I would say, I know Jesus is a miracle worker, a lot of arrows in my quiver. I know there's a God. I know there's an afterlife. I know that today many, many people are healed. 2 volumes on my shelf over there with thousands of healing cases, 2 more over there with many healing cases by medical doctors. That's the world I live in. It's a world where Jesus predicted his resurrection. Then he rose from the dead. That's what I know about the world. Can I give God a chance to get to heaven and let him tell me, because I think it'll only take him 1 sentence, but who died and put me on the throne? It's just my glasses. It's not reality. So I would say if I know the resurrection has happened, there's an answer to that question. Well, what is it? God knows it. Oh, it's just a cop-out. It's only a cop-out if there's no God. And it's only a cop-out if there's no resurrection, but both are true.
Well, extraordinary, and stimulating thoughts and comments. I really appreciate you taking the time today. We covered a lot of ground, and it was, it felt like it went by in 5 minutes, but this was really wonderful. So thank you for all the work you've done, and thank you for taking time.
I enjoy it. It's all about ministry, and if some of this can help somebody who's got the empty gas can, and you tell them it's about your glasses, and they fight with you for a few minutes, but then they realize it is about their glasses, you've helped one more person. So I think it's great.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. You're welcome. Aren't you glad there's people like Dr. Gary Habermas in the world? What a wealth of information delivered in a compelling way with that little bit of a smile and a glint in the eye. I just love the character of this man. I love his passion and how he delivers his message, and I was really glad I could share it with you. Capernaum is a place that is central to Christ's ministry. So many miracles occurred there. When you walk the streets of Capernaum, look around, you really get a sense of the spirit of the area and the spirit of Christ. Capernaum was also the home of St. Peter, so I'm excited to take you on a walking tour of Capernaum. So Tisha, we're obviously in a very popular place here. Where are we?
We're at Capernaum. This is the center of Jesus' ministry.
When we say the center, what does that mean?
It means that, first of all, Jesus we know was from Nazareth, and the prophet's never accepted in his own hometown. In fact, we remember he was at his famous synagogue speech, and they wanted to throw him off the cliff, the brow of a hill. And the next thing we know, he disappears in their midst and reappears right here at Capernaum, which this, scripture says, becomes his own hometown, even his own city.
And what's the significance of this site right here? They have, a bunch of structures around us.
Right here we found an ancient synagogue. We actually found the base of the synagogue from the time of Jesus. The top of the synagogue is from a later period, 3rd or 4th century. We also found what we believe to be the house of Peter.
Wow.
Which is just behind us.
So Peter's house, we're right here by the water, so obviously it would make sense they lived here because, we're right by the water. He was a fisherman. It all kind of ties together.
Peter, actually, we know from scripture that Peter was from Bethsaida, which is another one of the villages that saw most of the miracles of Jesus. Bethsaida, Chorazim, and Capernaum saw most of the miracles of Jesus. Yet, how sad is that they were all cursed for their disbelief.
Wow.
And so, we know this was a fisherman's village during the time of Jesus, but very significant in the ministry of Jesus.
So, with the first century, the walls of the first century synagogue, is it presumed then that Jesus probably spoke in that synagogue?
Many times.
Yeah.
Right. If John 21, the last verse says there's not enough books in the world to contain what took place here.
Right.
In those 3 years, he just had 3 years of his ministry. Can you imagine in his own hometown how many miracles took place here and how many times he must have taught in that very synagogue?
So this is basically characterized as the hometown of Jesus, not where he grew up, but where his ministry was and
That's
where he
right.
resided.
This would have been the center of his ministry. And people ask, why this particular town? Well, there were over 200 villages here in the Galilee that he could have chosen. But I think one of the most important things for this particular town is its location. You have to understand, when Herod Antipas, first of all, Herod the Great died, and then his sons take control. Now, Herod Antipas got the area of Tiberias, and Herod Philip got the area of the Golan Heights. There was a customs house right here on the main trade route at Capernaum. So you would have to go through a customs house to cross into territory to territory. So we're crossing from here into the territory of Herod Philip. Now see, Herod Philip was a lot more lenient than Herod Antipas. Remember, Herod Antipas was the one that had beheaded John the Baptist.
Right.
So Jesus, first of all, would have had a lot more leniency and freedom to minister here and teach. Second of all, we just talked about the trade route. You have to understand that also Israel is like a land bridge, and this land bridge connects Asia, Africa, and Europe. And so basically anyone in biblical times that possessed this territory controlled the trade in the ancient world. So this trade route had trade and caravans coming up and down all the time. So first of all, he has the freedom to minister in the territory of Philip. And second of all, it's like a super internet. People are coming through and seeing this peripatetic or traveling rabbi, and he's teaching, and the blind are seeing, and the paralytic are rising, and the deaf are hearing, and news spreads like wildfire down that trade route, and it really is like a super internet. And then all of a sudden you have people flocking, and 5,000 people and not enough food to feed them.
So when Christians are on a pilgrimage, this is kind of a vital area for them to visit if they want to really experience the land that Jesus walked on, where he performed his miracles, where he ministered, where all these things happened.
This is it.
Yeah.
A tiny little triangle, those three villages saw most of the miracles, and so this is a very significant place for Christian pilgrims to come to see where it all took place. If you want to get technical, 95% of the Bible took place in an area of 150 by 50 miles. Here we're talking just a few mile triangle saw most of the miracles of Jesus.
Now there's a statue over here also for Peter about building his house upon this rock. So what's the significance of that?
Right. Well, we know in Matthew 16, Jesus gives Peter the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And so that took place in Caesarea Philippi, also in Philip's territory, Caesarea Philippi. And so that is not at this particular location, but obviously the house of Peter was uncovered here, and that's why the statue is here.
So they built this structure over what looked like the ruins of the house of Peter. So why did they build a structure over it that way, and kind of how does this lay out? Because there's kind of the house, and there's a synagogue that's behind the house. So how would this have all laid out in the time of Christ?
Well, first of all, the house was much smaller than what we're looking at. You can see that behind us is the church that was built. It was built later, much later. This is a modern church. But it actually is over the house of Peter underneath, which is a small cubicle. And we believe that was the house of Peter due to ancient inscriptions. Now, you will see when you go down that there's an octagonal structure that goes around the house of Peter. That's from 4th century church, 4th and 5th century churches that were built around it. And when the early Byzantines built churches, when Constantine made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire in 324 AD, they built churches in octagonal shapes, and that was to venerate what was holy in the center, in this particular case, the house of Peter. Now, next to the house of Peter, you'll see there's a big area which is called the insula, and that is an extended family dwelling. And you can see several homes, probably 15 families live there. But the house of Peter is just one of those cubicles, just one particular house.
Right. I walked over, I said, oh, it looks like kind of a big house.
Right.
But that's actually, he was just one little piece of that,
That's
and there
right.
were all these other families that were living around.
Right.
And then, when we look at the ruins from the 4th century synagogue, you said, but the one below it is the foundation. Did they just build a newer synagogue on top of the old one? Is that how that worked?
They did. Now, the Jewish people always built the synagogue in the same place. It was in the focal point of the city. It was the most important building in the city. And so if the synagogue was to be renovated or destroyed, they always built the synagogue in the same place. So in this particular case, you'll see that the base of the synagogue from the time of Jesus was actually black. That's basalt stone. Now, behind us are the Golan Heights. They're inactive volcanoes, so basalt stone is a local stone that's dried lava. And so that is what the synagogue was built of during the time of Jesus.
Right.
The synagogue on top here, you'll notice, is a beautiful white synagogue, limestone. It's not a local stone. By the 3rd and 4th century, there was a mixed population of Jew and Gentile, and the Jewish population wanted to make this beautiful white synagogue in contrast to the rest of the city or village.
Right.
And that's why they built it in a different color stone.
But they put it right in the same place because that's the place where they traditionally would put a synagogue even hundreds of years later. They cited them that way. So is this actually where the church started?
Well, if you look at the house of Peter, first of all, there's several things that could have happened there. I mean, one, we know that Peter's mother-in-law was healed of fever. That could have happened right there in that church.
Wow.
Another thing that we know that happened here in Capernaum is that the paralytic was lowered through the roof and healed. That could have happened right there. It could have been where Jesus stayed, and it could have been the first church. So very significant. This is where he called his disciples, and it was basically the first gathering place for Jesus and the disciples.
When Jesus came down, he landed in Israel. So we must praise him in an African way. He came down from heaven. When he landed in Israel. There was trouble. He came down to Africa. So we must praise him in an African way.
With Christ Revealed, we talk about the history, the evidence, and the inspiration. And I have to tell you, when we look at these archaeological digs like we just did, the evidence seems to be mounting up. It's very validating, something that I hope you got a lot of joy and also a lot of intellectual stimulation from. So thanks for tuning in. Professor Mordecai Aviam is an archaeologist, and he's working on one of the newest and most significant archaeological finds in recent history. It's the biblical site of Bethsaida. Scholars believe it was near Bethsaida where Christ fed the multitudes with 2 loaves and 5 fish. Professor Aviam actually takes us down into the site and explains its significance. This is something new, fresh, something that's powerful. I'm really excited that we can go get into this archaeological site together and understand how significant it is. Professor, thank you for inviting us here and for your time. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
I'm an archaeologist. I'm teaching at the Kinneret College, the Department of the Study of the Land of Israel. And I'm an archaeologist in the Galilee for the last 40 years, digging mainly what we call classical archaeology, from the Hellenistic 3rd century BC to the late Byzantine 6th, 7th century CE. I was focusing on Byzantine churches and then on the Second Temple period Judaism in the Galilee. And that's the field, the ancient synagogues. That's the field I'm doing for the last 40 years.
And where are we right now?
We are now at a site. Its Arabic name is El Araj. Its Hebrew name is Beit Habek, which means the house of the Bek. Bek is a name in Turkish for a very rich person. This land, the entire valley, Bethsaida Valley, between the Golan Heights in our back and the Galilee in our front, he owned it in the late 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. And he built here a farm and a palace for himself and his family. And he came here every winter. It's a nice place to be in the winter palace, rather in Damascus. And that's the origin of the Hebrew name. There was a little palace over here, 2 stories high building, white, with a red roof. Stood here from the end of the 19th century until 1955, with steps leading down to the Kinneret, to the lake. Very nice place. In the end of the 40s, beginning of the 50s, it became a Syrian military outpost. and there were Syrian soldiers here. It was the border between Israel and Syria until 1965, until the Six-Day War. The Jordan River was the border. And the Syrians had attacked many times the Israeli shipping boats on the lake. And therefore, in 1955, the Israeli army attacked many of the Syrian outposts in the around the Sea of Galilee. And one of the units came over here and blew up the building, which was the headquarters of this camp, and retreated, of course. In 1967, the Six-Day War, the entire area was conquered, including the Golan Heights, and since then, Israeli archaeologists were able to visit the place. This place is known from the end of the 19th century as one of the candidates for Bethsaida. And therefore, from the end of the 19th century, when scholars were interested
And when you say one of the candidates, it was known that a place existed called Bethsaida, which means home of fishermen.
Yes.
And so they were searching, saying, it must be in this area somewhere. So you came looking for, trying to find the archaeology. Now, when was the dating for Bethsaida?
Bethsaida is first mentioned in the New Testament as the home place of three of the apostles, Peter, Andrew, and Philip. So if we put it in historical frame, let's say that around the 20s, 30s, we speak here about a Jewish village. And then Josephus Flavius tells us about the place. He was here in 66. He became the governor of Galilee for the first Jewish revolt against the Romans. So he came here in 66, and he is a little military clash between his units and the soldiers of Agrippa II from the Golan, King Agrippa II from the Golan. And he said that the battle was near Julias, and that he was wounded. He fell into the swamps, so it's a swampy area. And here we got to the name Julias. So he tells us that in the year 30, King Herod Philip, who was the former king of Golan area, the son of Herod the Great, decided to upgrade the position of the village Bethsaida, made it a polis, and renamed it Julias, after the daughter of the emperor. That's the story from Josephus, which we believe there's no reason not to believe that it is true. And therefore, that's a place we connect Julias and Bethsaida and the location. So the location is very clear. It's the swampy area near the Jordan. That's what Josephus tells us. It's in this valley that is later on called Bethsaida. And we can be sure that we speak here about a Jewish village in the 1st century BC, 1st century CE, which was upgraded to be a polis around the year 30. So scholars were looking for the remains of a Jewish village and a polis from the early Roman period. And from the end of the 19th century, there were three candidates. First one is a site called Ethel, which is a tell, a biblical tell, just about 2 kilometers northeast from us, about 2 kilometers from the shore of the Sea of Galilee. The second one is called Mas'udiyah, which is 2 kilometers to the east. And the third one is El Araj, which is the site we are in right now. Each scholar at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century was fighting or suggesting which site is the better. Some of them were sure that Ethel is the better one, it's high on a hill. And some suggested El Araj, mainly because on surface there were a lot of architectural fragments like pillars, bases, capitals, and things like that, which disappeared mostly during the year. 30 years ago, a colleague, a friend, Rami Arav, started excavating at Ethel and discovered houses dated from the late Hellenistic to the early Roman period, late 2nd century BCE, 1st century BCE, and 1st century CE. And therefore, he suggested that Ethel is Bethsaida now as a scientific result from the excavation. There are houses from the 1st century, therefore this is Bethsaida. he continued the dig for 30 years. He finished the Roman period. He got down. He found a very, very interesting Old Testament city, an Aramean city. Very interesting, but not connected to our story, of course. But during these years, he continued calling it Bethsaida, and therefore it got its name even in the scientific world, for sure in the public. Even the Ministry of Tourism of Israel, after 1967, of course, when it became in Israeli territory, and after the excavations, put a sign on the main road saying Bethsaida, showing a tail. And on the side, they developed some touring trails and some signs. So everyone knows that this is Bethsaida, but the disagreement continued all these years. There are other scholars suggested that it's wrong, mainly because it's far away from the Kinneret, but also because there were no remains at all of any urban sphere.
Right.
There are two houses that look like rural villagers' houses, fishermen houses. And therefore the debate continued. 2 years ago, we did here the first season of excavations. Even before that, we did a little survey, and even before that, others did some surveys here. And there were first century, early Roman period pottery found on the ground. Ramirov suggested that these pottery came with floods from other areas, and therefore it's not an early Roman site. He said that in the early Roman period, El Araj was submerged 2 meters below the Sea of Galilee, and therefore there is no Roman layer here. He even strengthened his opinion by coming here and digging some 25 years ago or so. He came here and dug 2 squares here, and he said, we found here Byzantine structures, including Byzantine pottery. We dug below it, we found nothing. Therefore, the site was inhabited only in the Byzantine period,
Which was much later.
which is 5th, 6th century AD. This was the situation until we came to dig. And we came last summer. It is the Kinneret Institute for Galilean Archaeology, which is part of the Kinneret College, and Nyack College in New York. My colleague, Professor Steve Notley, with American students and volunteers. We came here and dug last year. This was the first season. And we discovered here 2 layers. The upper one was 13th century AD, which in Israel is the Crusader period.
Right.
There was a sugar factory here. Below it, there are remains of Byzantine period houses, which we suggest to be probably a monastery that existed around a church. And the season was over. But we, of course, did not get to our final target. Final target in archaeology is to get into virgin soil. Only when you get to a virgin soil, you can say, okay, there is nothing below it.
Right.
Whether it is natural rock or virgin soil, meaning no pottery in the soil.
Right.
We didn't finish. So we came this last summer. We took off some of the floors of the Byzantine period, and we dug below them. Some 20-30 centimeters below the Byzantine floors, we hit Roman period layer.
Wow.
1.5 meters of layers that included Roman pottery only. No Byzantine, no 13, only Roman pottery, which is late 1st century BC, 1st century CE to the 3rd century CE.
Wow.
Including 2 coins. One of them is very clear. It's a silver coin from the time of Emperor Nero, the year 65. And another one which is Roman from the 2nd century. So, first of all, we can say that the site of El Araj is back on the stage. Okay? It did not exist only in the Byzantine period, but it existed also in the Roman period. So here we have back again another candidate, like a tell that was some kind of a village in the 1st century. The surprise came at the very last day or 2 of the dig, of course. As always, we hit a wall. It's a small area. We dug only about 1 meter of its length, but it's a substantial wall, well built. And beside the wall, we found chunks of mosaic floor, white and black mosaic floor. And beside it, we found a few clay bricks. 1 or 2 of them are hollow bricks. This type of bricks exists only in Roman Bath, Roman period Bath, not Bath that belongs to Romans, but Bath from the Roman period.
Yes.
Very typical, as well as mosaic floors. And therefore we can clearly declare we found a Roman period bathhouse. And now the other result is that bathhouse did not exist mostly in the first century, the time of Jesus, the time of Josephus. Bathhouses were not very typical to villages, but it is more part of an urban sphere. And from this small find, we can come up and suggest, we do not declare, we suggest, that we have the first evidence of urban life in the Bethsaida Valley, and therefore we suggest that this is Julius. If this is Julius, it was also Bethsaida.
Right.
That's the results of our second season. We do believe that if we'll, and we will, continue next season or seasons, we'll have more evidence. And if we will find here other urban sphere material like pillars, like streets, like public structures, we can come and declare we found Julius, and if it's Julius, this is Bethsaida. So we have here the competition between two sites, one Bethel with rural buildings, no urban remains, and this site which has Roman period layers including urban remains. I think we're in a good position to suggest that there is a chance that we discovered Julius, and if it's Julius, it will also be Bethsaida.
So, and this is a very recent find. So, how long ago did you actually?
Last month.
Last month.
Yes.
Wow. So, with what's right behind you, I see that we have a dig right behind you. What is in there?
In the dig, we have mainly what you see on the surface are walls from the Byzantine period. We believe from the Byzantine monastery that was here. And below it, we have layers of soil. Some of them are floods of the Jordan River. Probably Julius stopped to exist somewhere in the 3rd century AD, maybe because of floods. So it did not continue into the very late Roman period and not in the Byzantine period. But in the Byzantine period, someone, the Christian empire, someone identified the place as Bethsaida. They didn't know that Bethsaida is here because already covered with 2 meters of soil.
Right.
But the tradition and the suggestion was that this is the place of Bethsaida, and therefore, beginning of the 8th century, a pilgrim who visited the area wrote in his memories, his name is Willibard, and he said that after he left Capernaum, which is west from us, he went eastwards and he found at Bethsaida the church of Peter and Andrew.
Wow.
So I think we found the church. This is probably part of the buildings we see behind us. But deeper inside, which you can see from here because it's 2 meters deep, is the wall with the remains of the bathhouse.
So what do we have here?
This is the place where we found the remains of the bathhouse. We can go down carefully here.
Okay.
We are standing on a Byzantine period floor. That's 6th century floor.
Okay.
6th century walls. This is the floor from the Byzantine period. This is the wall from the Byzantine period. We dug below the floor. We took all the pavers from here, dug below the floor, and what you see here are layers.
Right.
Some of them are floods from the Jordan River, but they all yielded Roman period pottery, nothing later.
Right.
So therefore, it all happened in the Roman period. And down there, at the very bottom, you can see stones.
Yes.
These stones are a wall. In front of the wall, we have pieces of mosaic floor and the bricks. So these are the remains of the bathhouse, dated to the Roman period by the pottery and coins above it. So what we have to do now is open the entire area and to get a very large area dated to the Roman period in expectations to find more of the bathhouse and other elements. Everywhere you walk, there are ancient remains. Israel is the first place in the world for ancient sites per square kilometer. More than Egypt, more than Greece per square kilometer. This is a small country. But this is the Holy Land. Okay, everything you walk on this land, below it you have the remains of ancient periods. Holy Land for the Jews, Christians, whatever.
And you said that in Israel there's more artifacts per square.
Ancient sites.
Ancient
Israel,
sites, okay.
Israel is the first place in the world for ancient sites per square kilometer,
Wow.
because the state is small.
Yes.
Okay, there are many more in Egypt, but the state is very large.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so we have the largest number of sites per square kilometer.
Wow. It really captures the imagination to seeing this. It's
That's
amazing.
why it's good to be an archaeologist in Israel.
Yeah. You're used to digging archaeological sites from a different period. So what's the experience like when you started to find these things from the time of Jesus, kind of where one of three places people would have guessed it was, and these things start to unfold? What's the experience like for an archaeologist?
I dug already a site from the first century in Western Galilee, a well-known and important site that existed at the time of Jesus. As a matter of fact, it is 3 miles away from Nazareth.
Uh-huh.
Its name is Yodfat or Jotapata. That's the place that fought against the Romans. The first battle between Jews and Romans was at Yodfat. This is the place where Josephus Flavius fell into the Roman hands. So I know the material of first century, but it was a very interesting experience for me to dig a site which is connected directly into Jesus' life, Jesus' movement, and the expectation of the world, of the Christian world, to find something from Jesus' time. That was a new experience for me.
Yes.
I'm an archaeologist. I am not dealing with religion at all. I'm not writing any articles on religion.
Right.
I write articles about Jewish synagogues and Christian churches. And the minute we made this press release that maybe we have Julius Betsaida, it was a tsunami. Really never happened to me. The world, the press in the world, the television, everyone, the radios from the entire Christian world. Every day for a week, since our first press release on Sunday, for a week I had every day, I think like 20 calls from different places in the world, from Japan to Brazil, of journalists who are interested. And that's touching the nerves of the Christian world, which is a very interesting experience for me. People will ask me, so what do you think that there will be? Will you develop here a pilgrimage site? I said, I'm not a developer.
Yeah.
I'm an archaeologist. I'll find what I'll find. I'll analyze what I analyze. I will try to prove whether it is Betsaida Julius or not. And then I leave it to the other developers, maybe it's the Israeli government or others.
So, but it's interesting because you approach this as a scientist, right? A very traditionally trained scientist to approach some place like this, but then it becomes a crossroad into the religious world, and now you find as a scientist, you've got the religious world, really looking at you in a very enthusiastic way with anticipation. So, does that change kind of the way that you work at all, or
No.
no?
It did not,
Good.
and it will not.
Yeah.
I'm an archaeologist. I'm doing archaeology. I'm doing scientific archaeologist for the last 40 years. I excavated 4 pagan temples, 4 Jewish synagogues, 9 Byzantine churches. I'm digging the history, and I also surveyed a mosque. Okay, so I'm digging the history of this land. On this land lived pagans, Jews, Christians, and I'm digging the history of this country. Therefore, I'm not attached to any of the actual remains. I'm not attached to the walls as a religious object.
Right.
Okay, I'm digging it scientifically, trying to date it and give the scientific world on one side the evidence, and trying to give lay people the evidence in a different taste. Okay, they are not really interested if the rim of the pottery is like that or that. They want to know who lived there.
Yeah.
So if I found there a mikveh, a ritual bath, I said this is Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
If I found there a church, I said this is Byzantine,
Right.
Christian. Okay, so we are digging here a Jewish village from the first century. It was Jesus and Peter and Andrew and Philip, who are all Jews who lived there in the village,
Yes.
that developed into the Christian religion, let's say 100 years or something like that later. And now everyone is interested in this piece of land, which makes me very happy.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to do scientific excavations and share the historical information with the people around the world.
Why did you decide to become an archaeologist?
It's interesting, maybe even unusual, but since I was 14, I knew I'm going to be an archaeologist. There was nothing else I ever wanted to do, and even up till now, some years before my retirement from being a faculty member, okay, I think it first of all has to do with things I learned at home about my father was a journalist. So we were traveling a lot in the country. And he was one of the establisher of this state. He was in the Jewish undergrounds, again, the British. So it was always a mixture of closer past and far past.
Right.
And we were traveling from place to place, and everywhere I saw some piece of pottery and glass, and I started to pick it up. And I grew in a place in the city of Ramat Gan near Tel Aviv, which was about less than a mile from a very ancient site. And I was walking there a lot, collecting pottery and flint and things like that. Made me very interesting. And the world in the 50s, late 50s and 60s, without television or websites or WhatsApp, was books. So I was reading a lot of books, and mainly historical books. And I think that my first dig I did when I was 15.
Wow.
And since then, I knew that's what I'm going to do when I grow up, and that's what I did.
So, because we talk a lot about history, and the land here just tells a story. And for you, is it fascinating that there's historical texts like Josephus, so there's the Bible, to be able to actually unearth things that corroborate what's been written so many years ago?
This is a very popular way to look at the at what I'm doing. Most of the people think that also part of the Indiana Jones stories.
Yeah.
That for the people, archaeology looks like something that we are reading the sources, if it's Josephus or the Bible, and we look and we dig to find what is in the books.
Right.
We're doing exactly the opposite. I don't come to dig here with the Bible or Josephus in my hand. I come to dig here with my tools, which are a pick and a hoe.
Yeah.
I take out the pottery, I analyze the pottery, I clean the coins, I read the coins. And then I said, okay, what I have here is first century. Let's see what was here in the first century. And I go to Josephus and I go to the Bible and I read and I said, okay, that's what we have. So it is exactly the opposite way.
Yeah.
But when you have the results and I write a book or I write an article or I'm interviewed on the TV, the story is combined. Therefore, the people, that's what they see in their life. They think
Yes.
it goes together.
Yes.
But it's different courses that are not completely parallel, but somewhere at the end, they meet together, emerge together, and we have the story, archaeology and history. But there is no doubt. Let's speak about new evidence about first century. Okay, Josephus is with us. The book, as we understand it from the 17th, 18th century, people are reading it and analyzing. Historians until today reading and reanalyzing it.
Right.
But there's no new chapters that were found.
Right.
But every day in every dig we have new evidence
Right.
that are coming to light, and they are illuminating the history. That's what it does. It illuminates the history, and that's, I think, is exciting.
Yeah. So how long is this particular dig that you're in now? How long do you think it's going to last as far as the project?
There are two components. One is my wish and will, and the other one is money. Archaeology is low-tech.
Yeah.
Okay? We have to come here with cars. The students have to fly over here. We have to feed them.
Mm-hmm.
We have to clean the coins. We have to mend the pottery. We have to sit down in the libraries to read. We have to fly to good libraries and to sit down and read. The entire process, from the dig to the final report, costs a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
So if I will have every sum of money I want, I will make a project here for the first 5 years and dig every summer for 4 weeks with about 40 students. And I think that in 5 years I can open an area which is really large enough to get into very good conclusions, whether it is or it is not.
Mm-hmm.
What we discovered a month ago, we are working on funding, and if we'll have the funding, we'll do here a project of at least 5 years. Let's assume that in these 5 years we have here a little bit of a street with pillars on the side, and the very beginning a corner of a theater, Roman-style theater like in Tiberias, where Herod Antipas, the brother
Right.
of Herod Philip, built. Let's assume we find here a huge wall that I can say, this is a corner of a theater, now we have to dig the theater. 5 more years and few more millions of dollars.
Yeah.
That's how it goes in archaeology.
How does it get funded?
This,
Yes.
with some money from Naya College, with some money from donors.
The government doesn't fund.
Israeli government doesn't fund scientific excavations.
Mm-hmm.
The government supports excavations which will go into development of Ministry of Tourism,
Mm-hmm.
for example. And for example, people probably know Bechan Scythopolis, maybe the largest excavation in Israel, or Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it are funded by the Israeli government,
Mm-hmm.
but they are not supporting any scientific excavations. We have to look for money ourselves.
And if somebody wanted to donate to this, how would they do that?
They put it in my pocket.
Write the check to you personally?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's better. You can drive here with a good car. If someone wants to donate for excavations, these excavations, I assume he can be in contact with my colleague in Naya College, Steve Notley, and he is organizing the funding. It's a mutual project. He is an historian of the New Testament. I'm an archaeologist. That's a great mixture, by the way.
Yes.
And students are coming here to dig. They get their credits from the university. And we do hope, I think, after this huge noise that was made last month with our release, I think that I hope that we'll be able to find someone who is very interested to support a scientific dig.
Yes.
Okay, we are not digging here to find the footsteps of Jesus. We are digging here scientifically to identify a settlement from the 1st century, which, if it will be identified as Bethsaida Julias, can be an important important location, an important message to people who are looking to be inspired from the connection between the land and the belief. Okay, we are digging here in soil. We are very dusty after a day, sweaty. That's 45 degrees centigrade.
Wow.
At 12 when we finished. In July, that was 45 degrees.
Wow.
But this soil is I would like to say, and it's very clear, this is the soil of the Holy Land.
Yeah.
Okay? For me, it's the soil of the state of Israel with its historical treasures of different people, different beliefs, and different religions. But at the very end, if we have results that can be identified, I'm really happy that people will be able to connect their religious feelings into a site like that. And it's all around us. It's in Capernaum, it's in Tabga, the Heptapagan, it's in Kursi, in Jerusalem, in Masada, in every Jewish synagogues. People are coming, visiting, having their religious feelings, and they connect something which is in the brain, or as we say, in the heart.
Yes.
Okay, but you do know that the heart is only a small pump.
Yeah.
Okay, but in the brain, bring the feelings in front of stones, or as I like to call it when I teach, I call it let the stones speak.
Yeah. Why do you only dig, for a small part of the year? Especially probably the worst part of the year from a temperature standpoint.
Summer is not the worst part of the year, especially not in Israel. I love summer. I also like winter. Our winter is wet and our summer is dry,
I see.
completely dry. Okay, there are no summer rains in Israel. That's something different from your world. Some places in the U.S. have also dry summer. If it's wet, we cannot dig. Wet soil is not good. I cannot sift it, for example, to look for coins, other things. And you cannot dig when it's pouring rain on your head. Therefore, That's the first reason why we don't dig here in the winter. Second is that, which is very important, is that the professors and the students are on vacation.
Yeah.
And they are the working power. We don't hire workers. And now I'm digging another site. I'm working with workers.
Yeah.
But that costs more money.
Yeah.
So we need the students. We want the students. We want to teach the students. We want them to get the credits to be the BAs or masters or PhDs. And we use them as workers. And this is their vacation. So they're coming here, and I can tell you I'm working with American students since 1992, every summer almost.
Yeah.
99% of them came back home and said this summer changed their life. So there is no problem working in the sun.
Yeah.
It's not in the sun, working on the tarps. In the heat,
Yeah.
you sweat, you dirty, and you go to the shower and it's gone.
Yeah.
Okay, you feel even better after that. It's physical work. It's very good for you. You cannot die from heat.
Mm-hmm.
If you drink water and you put your head on, you can die from cold.
Yeah.
Okay. Therefore, Israel is a great place. It's not too cold. You can die here from other things, especially drivers.
I love it. First, I wish you the best of luck, even though I'm sure you don't believe in luck, but I wish you well in the dig and what you find, and I hope it's very satisfying. I also wish you well in getting the funding you need to make sure that it happens. And I'm sure I'm not alone in that. A lot of us would like to see you find out what is truly here. And I also want to say I appreciate your time and efforts in inviting us here to share this experience with you.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much for joining us for this interview, for taking this Christ Revealed journey with us. Really excited to be able to share this information with you. Thanks for tuning in. That completes episode 4 of our 9-part docuseries, Christ Revealed. So great to be with you. What a journey, and there's a lot more to go, so don't think that you've seen it. You've not even seen half of it yet. Also know that you can own Christ Revealed. There's multiple packages available here for you. Just find the one that's right for you, see what kind of bonuses there are there, choose it, own it, and I promise you that this is something you're going to want to revisit over and over again. You'll be really glad you did. I will see you in episode 5.